Yeah, look, I was enraged enough about the Pell case to reply to something that Jack Waterford wrote in September 2019. I wrote him an email. I think there was an email in this, and I said, thanks very much for your work on the David Eastman case, where I'm sure that the work you did helped towards getting the case reviewed, and ultimately, even though he was forced to have a retrial, he was acquitted. So that was good. So I very much appreciated the work that Waterford did on that. So I'm just comparing that to this sort of piece of verbal diarrhea from 2019 that he wrote. This is a brief reply to your points in your article published this week. I don't have time to do more, at least for the moment. Try to do your own investigation. This is a much bigger case than a sex abuser priest. This is a story about Pell being stitched up with false evidence. So Waterford says the High Court should leave Pell alone. There's no unresolved point of law, and no mere judicial disagreement on facts invites special leave. He says the unanimous verdict by the jury implied that it had considered and rejected each of the arguments that Richter said made the crimes impossible or so highly improbable as to demand reasonable doubt. I think he's begging the question there. This is most extraordinary. This is most extraordinary. He's somehow suggesting that the arguments that Richter made had to make the crimes very highly improbable in order to demand a reasonable doubt. Sounds like complete nonsense to me. I think that Richter's arguments do make the crimes highly improbable, without any doubt. But surely, in a reasonable assessment of the facts, if the crimes were made unlikely, why on earth was there a conviction? Why on earth does it make it a reasonable conviction? He says, the inquiry that the ground requires is a purely factual one. I don't know what that means, but I do remember doing a philosophy course in 1964 when I failed. I thought it was a complete load of rubbish, the course. It was some kind of humiliation for the students who were sitting in a lecture theatre, more than 100 students, giving 3 hours of lectures, and it was really quite humiliating nonsense, the whole thing. He says, the appeal court reviews the evidence as it was presented to the jury and asks itself whether it was reasonably open to the jury to convict the accused. He says, in our view, it was open to the jury to be satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that Pell was guilty. There was nothing, and this is, I'm wrong, this is actually quoting from the two judges that found against Pell. I'm pretty sure it is, but clearly Waterford is taking this over and just putting this boilerplate into his article, believing that this is supporting his case for no appeal. He says, it was open to the jury to be satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that Pell was guilty. There was nothing about A's evidence or about the opportunity evidence which meant that the jury must have had a doubt. So this is a very, very strange phrase. The jury must have had a doubt. This is I think it's a very deceptive piece of rhetoric. And I think it was, I believe it was Weinberg who pointed out that what is relevant is whether a hypothetical reasonable jury would have had a reasonable doubt about the truth of A's account. And Waterford goes on here. He says that Pell's apologists, I'm wrong. He's quoting from what the two judges who didn't support Pell in the lower appeal court. He's actually quoting what they said, quoting their summary. He says there follows a 120-page analysis of the points made repeatedly to the jury trial, and he says that they're saying that Pell's apologists have merely been parroting the defence summing up, something the jury considered but rejected. Now, by law, a robed archbishop is never alone. He says that nothing leads us to the conclusion the jury must have had a doubt about whether there was a realistic opportunity for the offending to occur. Of course, all this information leaked out. This is amazing. This information leaked out in the High Court appeal. Most astounding. Plenty of evidence that the room has got other people in the what's called the sacristy, which is a room where these people change their clothes. I think it's called a sacristy because it's used for other purposes. Maybe they consider these objects sacred, like chalices or something. I'm not sure why it's called a sacristy. But he says, and this is parroting, not parroting. This is just a little piece of boilerplate from the judges who voted against Pell. It says, taking the evidence as a whole, it was open to the jury to be satisfied of Cardinal Pell's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. My comment, notably, the two judges do not say that there was a reasonable opportunity for the offending to occur. Only that the jury need not have doubted that it occurred. Their argument is a red herring because the jury have been duped by the rhetoric of the prosecution. And he goes on to discuss the 300-page document from the lower appeal court, which had 100 pages in favour of dismissing Pell's appeal and a 200-page write-up from Weinberg supporting Pell. And they're more or less saying that in many ways the judges had similar opinions about things. And he says that it's almost impossible for the judgments for or against upholding the conviction to be considered for errors. Oh, hello. Hi. Hello. Hello. Yeah, look, sorry, I can't help you. Thanks. Okay, let's see if we can run on here. My doubt is a doubt the jury ought to have had, said Weinberg. I think some people would be assuming, because Weinberg made some very modest comments in his statement which supported Pell. I think some people would be thinking that he thinks, you know, maybe there's a chance that Pell's innocent or something like that. I don't think that's a reasonable way of reading the story at all. I think the evidence is overwhelming that Pell is innocent, but it doesn't mean that that the appeal judge has to put that into his report. I think, for example, that most of the judges in the Supreme Court would have thought that the accuser's statement is nothing but lies, but I don't believe that they had to put that in, that they needed or wanted to put that in to their verdict. He says, Weinberg is not at odds with Ferguson and Maxwell as to a question of law. It's a difference of opinion about the significance to be given to the different facts or alleged facts in a particular case. This is just complete gobbledygook that Waterford is writing here. The case is, this is from Waterford, but it's he's trying to summarise what he believes the two judges who rejected Pell's appeal are saying. He says, it raises no novel issues of law. Cannot be said that the courts were in disarray merely because one distinguished judge disagreed with two others about the conclusion to be drawn from evidence. This is a very strange piece of rhetoric here. Why does he bring in a question about whether the courts are in disarray? Because one of the judges, why does he bring that in to a statement about whether Pell should get a hearing in the High Court? Why does he bring that in? Is he suggesting that if there was propaganda in the newspapers that the courts are in disarray, that they should hear it in the High Court? I don't know what he's trying to say here. He says it's for the High Court to decide whether it would hear an appeal. And it's quite unlikely that it would be affected much by the fact that his lawyers are seeking a third bite of the cherry with arguments that have so far been considered at length and rejected by three judges and a jury. I thought that's a very interesting statement. I think that's a very, very interesting statement there. He's saying that, what is he saying here? That the judge in the original trial has rejected statements. What are these arguments that the judge has rejected? Well, the most interesting statement. What are these arguments that were considered at length and rejected by the judge of the original trial? I think we'd like to hear more about that. That sounds like a whole new area that could be opened up. He says in the Chamberlain case or the Eastman case or any other number of miscarriage of justice cases made clear, you can keep working away and ultimately get exoneration. For example, Eastman was in jail for 19 years. Chamberlain was in jail for I don't know how long. Could have been 2 or 3 years. I can't remember how long it was. And he says that it seems hard to imagine that fresh evidence could come up in the Pell case that would lead to, in other words, that would lead to the conviction being overturned. This is a very strange statement because anyone with a minimal amount of investigation of the case, anyone knows that all information about the accuser is suppressed. So some people claim to have identified the accuser. Keith, in Quadrant, believed that he knew who the accuser was. So I believe that leaving Pell in jail would have ultimately caused the accuser to be exposed. And that's probably something that Waterford should have thought about when he's claiming it's hard to imagine that it could happen in the Pell case. I think it would have happened. I think the accuser would have been exposed if Pell had been left in jail. Let me give you a comparison here. The Billy Doe case in Philadelphia in 2011. investigative reporter Ralph Cipriano studied this case in great detail. So he exposed the fact that Billy Doe was a 24-year-old heroin user, and that the police were looking for someone to give evidence, historical evidence, from the 90s. And he claimed that he was sexually abused by 3 people, 2 of them priests, when he was 10 years old. One of the priests, he claimed that he was sexually abused after weekday mass, when there's very few people around. Weekday mass, 6 a.m. And the first week, the priest showed him pornographic magazines, asked him whether he liked the men or women in the magazines better, and said, look, and gave him water wine to drink, and said that make a man of you or something, time to make a man of you, or some kind of statement like that. And next week, the guy was sexually abused. And similarities to the description, the claimed abuse by Pell. This is the toned down version of the evidence against Pell is a toned down version of the Billy Doe story, but I think it was done by a script writer who collapsed events from 2 successive weeks into one. For example, there were no pornographic magazines in the Pell story, but there was wine. It wasn't given to the boy by Pell. The boy claims that he found it himself. The accuser had meetings with a psychologist, but the defence are not given any details of this. Wouldn't it be dynamite evidence if the psychologist was working with the accuser to recover buried memories? Read the book Making Monsters, 1994, free PDF download on the internet. There'll be some who, for political, ecclesiastical or personal reasons, would deny Pell's guilt even if there were 1,000 witnesses. What an extraordinary statement. What an extraordinary statement from Waterford to make. Wouldn't a more plausible parallel be that there are many who, for political, ecclesiastical or personal reasons, would deny Pell's innocence, even if there were 12 witnesses giving him an alibi? It's happened in the actual trial. Finally, he finishes off with some rhetorical flourish. He says, the more these leaders gather at the foot of Pell's cross, the more they make it reasonable to say that Pell's conviction should symbolise the whole rotten era. Or maybe he's right. Maybe it does symbolise something rotten in today's society. Maybe it does. But it's an interesting metaphor to talk about the foot of Pell's cross, because, of course, there's no bigger symbol in the world, really, than the foot of Jesus' cross. So that's a really weird story to put forward.